hello everybody, how's it going today? Glowplasma231 here, back again today to talk about Hells Paradise Jigokuraku, Episode 8. This episode was titled Student and Master. And man, I'm getting like a weird sense of deja vu all of a sudden. It's like I'm finally have time and I am finally finishing up series that I started like 2 years ago at this point. So for those of you who aren't big and know everything that's been going on with the channel recently, I am finally getting back to older series that I started at one point, but never actually got to finish because, of course, I started the Hells Paradise review of the anime. Whenever the anime dropped, I filmed the first review after the first episode pretty much came out, which was all the way on April 5th of 2023, and here we are in September of 2024, which, if that's not like a time lag, I don't know what is for 7 videos to come out and then have an 8th also come out. And looking at it, I filmed the 9th video in this series, or not the 9th, the 7th video on episode 7 of the Hells Paradise Jigokuraku, and it got uploaded on December 22nd of 2023, which means that there's been about a 9-month time gap from when I last did one of these videos to when I am putting out this one now. But hey, I find it a little interesting, so it sort of is what it is. But of course, this is Hells Paradise Jigokuraku. Of course, the original manga is by Yuji Kaku, and this adaptation was done by MAPPA Studios. And I have a little few notes about how MAPPA has been doing on this production at the very end of the video, but I don't really want to get into all of those thoughts now. And this episode is very interesting because it does cover chapters about 19.3-ish all the way to about the end of 21. So of course, last episode was a bit of a weird one wherever it took a lot of these topics and the chapters and sort of rearranged them in a very interesting way, but in a way that really works to its benefit because this episode is all about Tenza, Nurgai, and Shion, of course, 2 Yamada Asaimons, and then one of the criminals, of course. We got pretty much our big introduction to both Tenza and Nurgai during episode 5 of the series, so 2 episodes ago at the point of this episode, right? And then the interesting part about this episode is that it also adapts a novel of Hell's Paradise Jigokuraku for a backstory of a character that we get in this episode. And I originally did not realize this, and I thought they added anime original content until I did a little bit of digging and snooping only to realize, oh, this episode covered a light novel thing, which we'll get into. I think it's a very good decision that MAPPA made animating this. Whatever you say about MAPPA, the way they are doing this adaptation so far is absolutely amazing. But with all of that out of the way, I think it's time we need to just hop in to this episode's content itself. Of course, talk about all of the parts of the episode, go through it sequentially, talk about it, and at the very end of the video, I'll be giving out my thoughts on this episode, how I think they did in comparison to the manga, and of course talking about where all of those specific chapters and where's this light novel stuff and where all of this sort of runs into this episode and why I honestly think this is the best episode of Hell's Paradise Jigokuraku that I have seen so far of the series. Disclaimer, I've not watched the other 7 besides for the times that I filmed the videos on them. So I did not go back and say, alright, I'm gonna watch the other 7 episodes in relation to this. I watched like the last 15 minutes of last episode just to make sure, okay, this is what happens. And then I cut myself off from that point. So, yeah, let's just hop right into it. So, we start off this episode in a little bit of a flashback, where we see, of course, Yamada Asaimon Tenza, who is the Yamada Asaimon who is in control of Nurgai to this point, one of the criminals, and we pretty much get a little bit about their backstory, as we pretty much learned that they were pretty much a sewer rat, and or street urchin as they're later referred to as. Let me turn off my light here so I can see my paper better. Alright, that is so much better for my reading capabilities. But we pretty much see that Tenza was born to some very unmotivated parents. They didn't really have his best ideal in mind, and pretty much left him out on the street to forge for himself. Tenza had to steal a lot to eat at various points, and we even get a note in the episode that he would do anything but kill someone for food. Eventually, he runs into some guys who call him street urchins. He gets into a little bit of a tussle with them, and as all of this happens, we see that Yamada Asaimon Shion eventually finds Tenza, and decides to try to recruit him into the Yamada Asaimons, right? At this point, we get the opening theme of the anime, which is, of course, work by Rino Shina and Millennium Parade. As I say in most of these videos when we get to this point, there's literally nothing I have to say about this opening. It's good. I've literally been listening to this opening on like Spotify and YouTube and all of this stuff for the past about a year and a half since this anime originally came out, which, holy crap, I'm behind on a few videos, but we're going to wipe that bead of sweat away from my eyes and get back onto it. So, opening theme is work. Whenever we come back from the break, we pretty much cut to what Tenza and Nurgai are doing, as we see that the two of them are currently walking around the beach trying to find a way off of the island, right? Pretty much they make a note of like, hey, as we've seen inside of that forest, there's a whole bunch of those Soshin creatures, which, if you guys don't remember what the Soshin are, those are the big sort of monk interesting creatures that sort of roam the island, and they're pretty much like, yeah, we want to avoid all of the danger by running into those guys, and like, we're honestly better playing it safe, going around the outside of the island here, and trying to find a current that will lead us off the island, because of course, we know that one of the whole points about this island of Shinsenkyo is that, what am I trying to say here? The current sort of blow back into the island, so people cannot easily escape, and there's a whole bunch of sea beasts and monsters, as of course we saw all of that in episode 5. Right? And then the two of them have a little bit of playful banter, as like, Nurgai's like, oh my gosh, you are so reliable, Tenza, and Tenza's like, oh no, I'm not. And there's a few jokes about marriage and stuff in there, saying being that is something that Nurgai often talks to Tenza about. But eventually, as these two are just bantering, all of a sudden, there's a splash in the ocean, and both Tenza and Nurgai sort of turn their heads and be like, what is that over there? As we see that it is one of the Lord Tenzin, as one of them suddenly appears into water before them. And Tenzin pretty much explains like, oh man, that forest was very noisy, and I also found a whole bunch of dead Soshin around there too. And he eventually just goes like, did you guys do that? As he or she, they start out as a female body, but eventually turn to one of a man, and start to go and attack both Tenza and Nurgai. The two of them continue to run away, and as the two of them run, all of a sudden the Lord Tenzin appears right in front of... Yeah, the Lord Tenzin appears right in front of Tenza. I'm sorry, those two T names for a second really got me off my game there, but... So I don't keep calling this Lord Tenzin. This character actually does have a name. They are one of the, I should have had this pulled up before then, but of course, being that this is a complete manga, we know the name, and this Tenza's name is Zhu Jin. Right, so this Lord Tenzin, Zhu Jin, sort of appears now in front of Tenza and sticks out their hand and pretty much like force palms Tenza back into a tree, right? And Tenza's like, oh crap, right? And pretty much tells Nurgai to run. Nurgai runs around, dodges a bunch of Zhu Jin's attacks, until eventually Tenza gets up, and in a really cool moment, actually what I chose for a thumbnail of this video, we see that Tenza comes through and completely slices through Zhu Jin's eyes like butter almost. And all of a sudden, he blinds and the two of them run away. At this point, Zhu Jin sort of regenerates its eyes, and at this point, Tenza just starts on a complete assault of this beast, and like just goes back and forth, and eventually both of them decide to run, and as Tenza pretty much just like cuts off a few of the arms of Zhu Jin and all of this stuff, they run around, and as they're running through the forest, the Tenzin appears in front of them again, and all of a sudden, as Zhu Jin looks like it's getting ready to do another deadly blow on possibly Tenza or Nurgai, we see that a sword is thrown and it completely shatters the head of Zhu Jin, and we see this is none other than Shion, or of course Yamada Simon Shion, right? Here for the next little bit of a moment, we get a little bit of like a blind spot where Tenza, Nurgai, and Shion are all able to talk, as pretty much we see that Shion is blind in both of his eyes, as of course done by the badass anime method of, alright, we have very even scars over their face, which I have to say, Shion has a fucking badass look to him. There's like no other way to put it than Shion is just like a really cool character design. And of course, it's one of those blind character things we even get described here in the next sentence, pretty much like he is able to see using smells and sounds. Of course, like, oh, here's your typical blind guy thing. He's got scars in the eyes and he's able to see the world around him by smelling and seeing, or not seeing, the sounds of everything around him. I don't know why I said seeing. It's like the exact opposite of being blind. But at this point, they pretty much all regroup and just start to talk to each other. A little bit of an interesting note, we learned that Shion is Yamada Asaimon rank 4, so he is actually very high up in the rankings of these Yamada Asaimon. Pretty much we also learned that Shion was also searching for a current to get off of the island, but as he found a single spot, but as he approached it, he sensed a presence of something that he had never sensed before, and he could tell that it was a very bad presence, and of course did not want to mess with it and decided to come back into the island, where he eventually ran into both Nuragai and Tenza. Pretty much as the two of them are like, all right, well, let's go to that spot. If we have 3 of us to work together, we can always get off this island and we don't have to deal with all of this stuff and just go back to the mainland. Call that job completely done, right? And as Tenza's pretty much saying, like, hey, we can do this as a team of 3, Shion suddenly grabs a sword and puts it over in Nuragai's face and pretty much says, okay, we can do that, but what about this girl right here? And there's a little bit of a joke that Tenza's like, oh my gosh, you could realize Nuragai was a girl this entire time? That's crazy. But as this pretty much happens, we see that, Shion's like, hey, why are you still protecting this criminal? Like, my criminal tried to seduce me, so I just killed them in return. I did my job as a Yamada Asaimon. And pretty much, Tenza's like, hey, it's not like that. Nuragai has done nothing wrong. But Shion's pretty much like, hey, you may put some shame on the Yamada Asaimon name if you continue to protect this girl, right? And at this point, Tenza just says, like, hey, you were the one, Master, who saw my personal potential, and I see potential in Nuragai. And he's like, hey, you are an extremely kind man, and I know this, and this girl did nothing wrong, so promise me that you won't hurt her, pretty much, right? And at this point, Shion's pretty much like, all right, if you exist, here's how we go, right? And it's at this point where Shion does the joke of like, oh, it's her, and Tenza's like, how'd you know that? And in a really funny throwaway line, it's like, hey, I've got a good eye for people, says the fucking blind dude. Very, very funny joke, though, right? As eventually there's like, all right, let's go now and actually check out that current, right? And as they're getting ready to go out and do that, Tenza pretty much just screams like, all right, let's go now. And all of a sudden, as they're just like, as Shion's like, hey, come on, Tenza, keep your voice down. We know that Lord Tenzin's still around here somewhere. Of course, Zhu Jin appears right behind them one more time, pretty much to say like, oh, I found you. And pretty much Zhu Jin just goes through and completely obliterates Shion's throat. Like, Shion's not dead from this wound, but he's not looking very good after having a part of his throat literally ripped out, pretty much, right? And at this point, Tenza comes in, of course, with his sword blazing, and he just starts trying to cut down Zhu Jin some more. But Tenzin pretty much says, like, hey, or Zhu Jin says, I'm sorry, I don't have Zhu Jin written down in my notes. This was something I decided to do, like, 4 minutes ago, or whenever I started talking about this character. So I keep saying Tenzin since that's what I've gotten written down on my page of literal notes here, right? But pretty much Zhu Jin just, like, tells Tenza, like, hey, you already attacked me earlier, and I'm already used to all of your strikes. And Tenza's like, all right, that's fine. And he's like, I'm going to just keep slashing, until eventually Zhu Jin brings up a very interesting piece of information. He says, normally you humans have to be alive to become tan, but you are pissing me off enough to where I am just going to kill you. Pretty much saying that, okay, the end goal of these people is to create this tan resource, which of course we know is possibly the elixir of life from last episode. And because of this, Tenza would normally become Tan as one of their like ultimate goals of the Tenzin, But Zhu Jin is so pissed off at Tenza for just being Tenza that they are just going to kill him and get rid of him, right? And at this point, Tenza starts to use his ultimate attack on Zhu Jin, so the other two can just get away, as he starts to like swing his sword down and go, Tameshi Ito Ryu Ultimate! And then he runs in and just screams, Pounding Torrent! And just goes through swinging his sword back and forth, just doing all of that general stuff, until eventually, Zhu Jin just appears in front of Tenza again, and just says, hey, I told you, I'm used to that. As he just goes and flicks his fingers inside of Tenza, creating 4 holes all around his body. 1 near his throat, 1 near his belly button, and 1 near both of his shoulders. Pretty much putting a lethal blow onto Tenza, as we can obviously tell here in this moment. And at this point, we do get the break of the episode. But of course, this is anime. What do you do in anime whenever a big main character seems to die, pretty much? Well, we go into flashback territory, as we get a little bit of a flashback between both Tenza and Shion in the past, whenever they used to, whenever Tenza was still a student of Shion. I mean, Tenza is still a student of Shion, but whenever he was a fresh new recruit, pretty much, right? As we see that one day, the two of them are just having a conversation outside, and Tenza's like, hey, why did you take me in, master, right? And pretty much, Shion just starts to explain to Tenza here that, like, hey, as Yamada Asaimons, our job is to be sword testers and to kill people, right? And as much as it's our job and it's something that we are asked to do and that we take pride in, killing people isn't always the thing I want to do. And he says, so in my free time, I've decided to also help as many people as I can, which I find like a very noble thing of like, hey, our job is to kill, but it doesn't mean we can't be kind at the same time. And he also just says like, hey, I saw a mass amount of potential inside of you, Tenza. And Tenza's just like, potential, and Shion pretty much explains like, hey, one day you want to protect someone, and if I can teach you how to do that, then your potential would have been realized, right? And pretty much he just says like one day, and at this point we sort of cut inside to where the two of them are training with, of course, Kendo 6, training their sword methods and everything, right? And we get a few shots here of Shion pretty much just overwhelming Tenza, and Tenza's not being able to do literally anything, just completely overwhelming him. And eventually we see that one day, this pretty much just comes to a head whenever Shion pretty much goes through and knocks down Tenza one too many times. And Tenza's just like, damn it, why do you keep doing this? And he's like, I'm never going to end up beating you. And he's like, I don't care at this point. I am just going to quit your fucking school. Like, who cares about this shit? I obviously don't. You're just better than me. Like, I don't have any potential at all. And you know that. So why are you trying to teach me something that I don't have? And Tenza just gets completely in Shion's face at this point. And Shion's like, hey, if you want to quit the Yamada Asaimon school, you do whatever you feel is best. But I will let you do that on only one singular condition. First, you need to land a blow on me, and at that point, I'll let you decide whether you want to leave or not. So we're just giving him an ultimatum, like, hey, I will let you leave the school, but I want you to end up trying to strike a blow on me first. At this point, we see that it's probably later in the day, as Tenza is leaving the dojo, obviously very pissed off, and he ends up running into the other Yamada Asaimon, of course, Yamada Asaimon Inzen, who, or Aizen, however you're supposed to say it. It's, A-I-U-E, so Aizen, I guess. I don't quite remember how the phonetics work here, of course. Like I said, it's been a little while since I ended up watching this show all the way through, but it runs into Yamada Asaimon Aizen, who, of course, we know is dead at this point in the series, got killed by their subject, Rakuda. But pretty much, Tenza runs into Inzen, and the two of them are sort of just walking around and talking, and Aizen, A-I-U-E-E, Aizen. Let me write that on my paper, just like phonetically. Aizen. Aizen. Why do I even subject myself to talking about Japanese names and stuff that I don't pretend to understand? I only took like a year and a half of Japanese in high school, and I still don't know anything. But the two of them are talking, and Aizen's pretty much like, hey, I don't care if you end up leaving to school or whatever, or if you don't even go and get the blow that you need to get on Shion, because he's like, yeah, Shion told me about your guys' bet. But first, will you accompany me somewhere? And Tenza's like, I don't want to, but I guess I'll like agree with his offer since he's not telling Shion where I'm going. And we eventually see that they head to a graveyard. And here in this graveyard, we see that Shion's first pupil is buried. This pupil is, of course, named Teshin. I mean, a character that we don't know. No, I said, like, of course, like, we know exactly who this person is. But we see that this character, Teshin, was Shion's original pupil, and that they very much lacked motivation. And at a certain point, they apparently had a very good potential too, but they ended up also leaving the Yamada Simon school, and they became a criminal to survive because of it. And we eventually see that Shion one day went to go and test out his sword training skills on a criminal, and before he swung, he eventually noticed that this criminal was Teshin, his former student. And we pretty much just understand through just like some context clues and what Tenza asked, like, well, what happened was Shion actually able to cut down Teshin, and Aizen pretty much just explains, like, I mean, it's his job. So after a brief pause, he did his job and he cut down his pupil. And he pretty much just says that, like, from what I've heard and what Shion also heard, the last words his pupil said to him were just, Master, I'm sorry. Or, of course, in Japanese, it's Sensei, gomenasai. Gosh, the voice acting was on peak in this subbed episode. It was so good throughout it, let me just say that much, right? And pretty much at this point, Aizen just says, like, hey, so Tenza, are you going to run before you score a blow on Shion? I mean, what are you going to do here? As we see the next day, what ends up happening is Tenza's there ready to spar with Shion. And they pretty much just get into it, as Tenza sort of thinks, like, hey, I have never really dedicated myself to anything, and here Master Shion was the first person to ever see anything inside of me. So I want to make sure that what he saw in me becomes a reality, as we see that he now has this dedication to come and attack Shion and just try and do this, as he just thinks, someday will I find someone to protect. And of course, we know in the present, the person he has found is Nuragai, which this episode does a great, like, I'm getting goosebumps just talking about it. This episode just does so much completely well. We got a little bit of the episode to get through left, so let's just talk about that when we talk about this whole episode as it is. So we cut back to the present here, where Tenza's like, oh no, damn it. He's like, I can understand I'm dying. And he's like, I can feel the holes in my chest, and he's sort of falling to the ground. He's like, at this point, we're all just going to be killed by this beast, as he is eventually like, God damn it, I wish I just could have done something. Until he eventually is like, no, what am I talking about? I can do something. And he stands up pretty much out of the grave almost. He's like, even if I do die, I will make sure that my master and Nuragai get away from this place. As he pretty much just stands up and grabs his sword and goes in to just completely just cut down Zhu Jin some more. And he just goes into attack, and pretty much attacks all the way until the end. As at this point, he gets a 5th mortal wound pretty much shoved into his body, as Zhu Jin pretty much punctures another hole in his chest. And eventually, we see that Shion just starts to run into the battlefield, right? And he's drawing his sword, and Tenza sees this, and he tries to yell out, but of course his throat's just destroyed, and he can't say anything. But he just gives a look to Shion, and I guess Shion hears this or senses it in some way, because of course that he can't see. And Shion just runs back, picks up Nuragai, and bolts out of this part of the forest into a deeper and probably arguably more dangerous part about this, right? And at this point, Nuragai is just crying like, why do we leave him here? Like, Tenza's so important. Like, we can't just let him to die like that. And Shion pretty just much like, hey, I'm sorry, like, I don't know what else I could have done. As we cut back to Tenza, who just continues to fight with Zhu Jin, just going back and forth, as he's eventually just thinking like, hey, thank you for believing in me, Master. Thank you for showing me my potential and showing me that I mean something. And he's like, I want the two of you to survive and live an amazing life. As he just thinks, I mean, I wonder what would happen if I would end up surviving. And we pretty much see that he just thinks about his own personal potential that he could have reached, as we pretty much see that he envisioned himself one day being a master to other Yamada Saimons and teaching others in a way that Shion taught him so long ago. And as we cut out from this bleak, very bleak image of like, here's what the future could have been, we see that Tenza's dead body is now laying on the ground, and we see that Zhu Jin, the Yamada Saimon, pretty much just like picks up his corpse off the ground and sort of just like throws him against a tree one more time, just saying, hey, I didn't actually expect that human to be that tough. And sort of a moment of acknowledgement for how strong Tenza actually was. We now cut back to both Shion and Nurgai. Nurgai's just like screaming like, we couldn't abandon him like that, why'd you do that, Shion? And Shion's just like, hey, it's what he would have wanted. He didn't want all of us to die. He wanted us to make it out of there. And he's like, we had to retreat, but no matter, the two of us will make him pay, or will make that thing pay for what they did to our friend, pretty much, right? And at this point, we cut over one final time. Oh gosh, this is just so sad. We cut over one final time to where Tenza's laying on the ground, and of course, he had that sort of typical shinobi headband with the two X's X'd in on top of it, and we see that the headband is laying on the ground as we see some cherry blossoms fall on top of the headband. Sort of a tree that blooms with potential is blooming onto the sort of grave of Tenza. And at this point, the ending credits start playing, but while the ending credits are playing, we see a few more scenes from this episode. We see that Tenza, we go back into the flashback where Tenza and Shion are sparring and doing all of that sort of thing, and we eventually see that Tenza lands a hit on Shion. And Shion's just like, oh, hey, good job, Tenza, like, well, what are you going to do now? Are you going to go off on your own, or, yeah, thanks for pretty much staying here, right? He's like, you're free to do as you please, so what do you want to do? And at this point, Tenza's like, please, continue to teach me more. But he eventually sort of realized, like, hey, I need to become more proper. So he kneels on the ground and just says, like, hey, Master Shion, will you please teach me the ways of the sword and how to be a Yamada Saimon? And at this point, we see Shion just does a slight smile and just says, why, of course. And we pan out of the dojo where they're training as we see all of the cherry blossoms blooming with potential outside of it. As at this point, we continue on into the ending, of course, which is Kamihate by Uru. And I almost want to cry now, because I'm going to be honest with you, I cried whenever this moment happened in the episode. Because, of course, you don't expect, one of my favorite tropes, let me just phrase it this way, one of my favorite tropes in anime is whenever the characters or somebody does something, whenever the ending theme plays. And this episode is all about Tenza's potential coming through. We see Tenza's a complete and fucking awesome badass. We see how amazing Tenza is. And in the end, when he eventually dies, we get the flashback to what his life was like. And it's just so sad with like the mix of the sad ending theme of Kamihate, or at least like that more mellow and drawn out terms, just seeing this. It's just very sad, and the animation team over at, or the adaptation team over at Mappa Studios did wonders with this episode in some spots, and in other spots didn't really do the best, but yeah, this was just a completely awesome episode through and through. So I've got a few sort of notes about this episode in general. All in all, I thought it was very visually pleasing, all of the sort of shots we get. Of course, I think the series has been very visually pleasing this entire time. At points, the animation was extremely choppy, as I specifically remember a few points when, like, Nergai is, like, beating on Shion's shoulders, like, why'd you leave him there? You could almost see, like, the individual frames of, like, where one arm's up here and now it's on his back, the other arm's back, and now they switch. And the animation is just very choppy to a point where it's like, this doesn't look good. This is a fucking amazing adaptation of the manga. I do not care what you say at all. The way that they did this to pretty much give Tenza their own episode, because as far as this goes, we only cover about 2.5 chapters of the manga, all things considered, because we cover all of 20, all of 21, and I guess it's a bit closer to 3. But the most interesting part is, like I alluded to earlier, so there are 2 Hells Paradise Jigokuraku light novels out there in the universe. And the first one, which was titled Utaka no Yume, or if I'm not, what was the English title of it? I've also got written down, The Ephemeral Dream, or Utaka no Yume. This is chapter 5 of that novel, is pretty much all of Tenza's backstory. Because in the manga, pretty much just go through what's in the manga, pretty much what's the content in chapter 19 is Tenza and Nergai walking around on the beach, all the way to the point where Shion throws his swords to cut off Zhu Jin's head. From there, chapter 20 of the series is pretty much just like the little bit of a lighthearted moment at the beginning of that chapter, all the way to the point wherever Tenza now has 4 holes in his body. And then the last chapter of 21 pretty much goes through to the point where he's like, where Tenza's like, oh no, I'm dying, like, oh no, what is all of this? All the way till we see the blossom that falls on his headband, and at that point we cut back over to Gabimaru and that group over in the Hoko region of, or no, whatever the middle village region of Shinsenkyo is. But pretty much we get a few notes of the backstory in the manga, pretty much mainly just like, hey, where Tenza talks to Shion is like, hey, why'd you end up taking me in and all of that? And pretty much Tenza just giving that first bit of like, hey, it was because I saw potential on you. But all of the other backstory that we get is actually from the light novel, which is incredibly interesting and a great way to adapt it. Because in the manga, Tenza has a very interesting moment, because it's like 3 chapters where he pretty much just like battles it out with Zhu Jin here. But in the manga, you don't really care about Tenza as much. And after seeing this novel adapted, I care about Tenza like 110 times more, because like the whole thing with Teshin, Shion's former student, whenever he talks with Aizen and all of that, or Aizen, I don't care how you're supposed to say it, all the way until that final thing of wherever Tenza lands a hit on who's his face, on Shion. All of that is a novel adaptation, which is just, it's so awesome seeing the way they worked it in. They worked it in really well, pretty much giving the backstory after Tenza has gotten a mortal wound, and then following up at the end of the episode while the ending is playing. Just a complete masterclass of the adaptation of the manga here. Like, hats off to Mappa on this episode. It is just so good. I don't really know what else to say, but yeah, this was a great episode through and through. And really my only issues of it have to do with the overall animation quality. Mappa, say what you will about them, they take on a lot of projects, and because of that, some of their other projects have to end up suffering. And, I mean, it really sucks that that's how it is. But hopefully whenever we start to get Season 2 of Hells Paradise Jigokuraku, hopefully it'll look a bit better in the animation quality. But again, my final thoughts on this episode is really just like, hey, visually pleasing, ending theme mixed with the episode was great. Great adaptation of the manga and, of course, the light novels. A little bit of a choppy animation there, and overall just a little bit of an animation fail altogether. But either way, this was an amazing episode of Hell's Paradise Jigokuraku, and a standout episode by far. So yeah, that's really all I got to say about this episode. Thank you guys so very much for watching. I've got my phone plugged in so I can see that this video has been going on for like 34 minutes right now, which is like an episode and a half of Hell's Paradise Jigokuraku. So thank you for staying with me for that long here. And Yeah, I mean, just thank you guys for watching. If you want to check out my other episode reviews of Hell's Paradise Jigokuraku, there'll be an end card on this video and also a playlist link down in the description down below. Can't really attest to the quality of those videos now, as they're not up to my current sort of standards, but I still think that they're fine videos, all things considered. And yeah, if you want to talk with me more and join in some discussion on maybe the animation of Hells Paradise Jigokuraku or the amazing moment where at least I cried during this episode, go down to the description down below and check out the both Twitter and Discord links. Are both linked down below there. And yeah, if you did enjoy the video, hope you mind leaving a like, subscribing to all of that cool stuff. And yeah, I'll catch you guys next time with Hells Paradise Jigokuraku episode 9. Of course, this was episode 8 of the series titled Student and Master. And yeah, thank you guys so very much for watching. And I'll see you guys next time. This will be Glowplasma 231 signing out. Well, one more note before I go, like that's not the end of the video. Tenza's a fucking badass, and I'll end it off there. Signing out.